Save the Semantics, episode 61. It is February 18, 2019. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I talk about stories, topics, and issues that are probably not as interesting if I were to tell it in person. These are things that I kind of think of on my own. I occasionally bring it into a conversation, but usually I just leave it to the podcast for the most part. Yeah, that's what the podcast is for the most part. You know, sometimes I'll incorporate some nuances and stuff like that. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm a little tired, to be honest. It is President's Day today, so I have the day off. No school or anything like that. So I have a little time to myself, which is nice. You know, it's been a good weekend as of now. So I don't exactly know what I'm gonna do next. Probably try to relax before I have my classes tomorrow, and I'm gonna have to start back up again. Another set of exams coming up this week and next week as well. So that's gonna be fun to get into. But that's enough on me for now. Well, I mean, this entire podcast is just me. So I don't exactly know what I'm trying to segue into. Finally, the weather's cleared up. This weekend it's been good so far. It's cold as hell, but at least it's not raining, which is nice, you know. Rain's been kind of hitting hard lately. There's been a lot of storms. Power went out for some reason. I have no idea how that happened. It's a little windy, but I don't see any. Sky's pretty damn clear. There's not really anything else going on in terms of brutal weather conditions. So yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. Might be a little freak accident or something. But yeah, that's just kind of what we're dealing with at the moment. Halfway through the month, I guess, more or less, a little more than halfway through the month. This year is just continuing to go by quickly. Don't exactly know what to anticipate other than just more of the same, I guess. I've been trying to kind of get back into. I've probably mentioned this before, or maybe I have, but I just kind of do it periodically. I periodically try to get back into TV shows, and I don't like at the moment. Finally, I have something that I'm kind of continuing to watch because I think it really has to be like it really has to hook me, you know. And I finally finished Wild Wild Country, which is that documentary series that I started watching way back, like 6 months ago, and I never finished it until like a week ago. I finally finished it up because I was like, you know what, I should at least finish this one because it is good. I just never got back to watching it again because I think I got stuck watching some anime shit. I don't even know what the hell I was watching back then, but I finished that up. It was a solid wrap up, I guess. I think. I'll talk a little briefly on the series, but for those who don't know, I've talked about it previously before, but just to give like a brief overview of the series. I'm not going to spoil it by any means, but I mean it is historically based, so I don't really think. I mean, I'll just tell what happens, I guess. So I don't know if you don't want to hear what happens, just kind of sift through this, I guess. I'm not going to put like time codes or anything like that. But anyways, a brief overview of what the show is about. It's essentially covering the this cult that originated in India with this guy named he went by the group's name is the Rajneesh, and the followers are the Rajneeshis. The main guy, his followers called him, or he changed his name at the end to Okra before he passed away. But up until that point, he was known as, what the hell was he known as? Come on. They said his name so many times. Like, I forgot. But like the main dude, he was a very spiritual leader back in the day. He had a very specific type of philosophy, and essentially him and his main sort of, I guess, lieutenant in command, this woman, helped him build this religion up to a point where they were able to essentially cross country, go to America, and build a civilization there. It's a crazy ass story. I definitely recommend checking it out for sure. And the documentary kind of follows the principles and the sort of the main beliefs of that religion, essentially, and sort of what it was built on. It was sort of kind of, so they throughout the series, there were, the main people who were being interviewed, and they were key parts of that movement, and the sort of the reasons for them joining that group was because they felt like their current position in, their society, their lifestyle or whatever, that something was sort of lacking. There was sort of like this. It was the entire religion was sort of built on this like anti-capitalistic vision where they were trying to move away from materialism. It definitely felt, this is coming from my personal perspective, but it definitely felt like they were kind of going for a very quasi-communist sort of vision, but like more hippie driven, if you know what I'm trying to say. Because essentially their identity was built on community and sort of everyone being the same, which is, there's nothing essentially wrong with that, but sort of the cult-like conditions of that movement and group, sort of, at least from my perspective, were kind of built on what they wore. All of them wore these like red clothings that identified them as part of the religion. They identified as Rajneeshis, and they just kind of they say that they're all unique individuals, and they're all same in the sense of their basic human rights and stuff like that. But they at the very center, they still had this this main spiritual figure, which I felt was relatively contradictory. Like I feel like it's sort of the whole point of having that type of movement is to move away from these secular religions where there's a god, and there's these deities that sort of bestow these qualities onto humans and stuff like that, right? They're trying the movement is trying to move away from that, but there's still this main spiritual figure who all these people look up to, which you could argue that that's like he's a good role model for everyone in terms of understanding their having like spiritual guidance and whatnot, or having an understanding of themselves as people and whatever. But they're still putting him like on a platform, which really kind of takes away the whole point of that movement, I feel like. I mean, there's other parts of that thing that the documentary series gets into, which I'm not gonna spoil because I feel like you should watch it for yourselves. But I think that's probably one of the biggest contradictions of their religion, and why it sort of is leaning, because it's not completely a cult, but I feel like it is much more of a cult than it is like it's more of a cult than it is like a healthy religion, if you know what I'm trying to say. I don't know what like what the proper term would be, because I mean, I do consider it to be somewhat of a cult, because they sort of embody these beliefs, and they're very like, they're inclusive to the point where they are willing to accept others who are in need and stuff like that, which I thought was nice of them. They invited these homeless people from the streets into their community, which I thought was, interesting. And I think in it had good intentions for sure, but they were also very like antagonistic, where like they encroached upon the people of Oregon. They moved from India. The main Rajneesh like group moved from India to this part of Oregon where there was open land and stuff like that. But it still felt like they were encroaching on these small town people and their own sort of like lifestyle. There was sort of like they felt like they were, being like taken over essentially, right? And of course, like I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could like view this, right? Like you could argue that, well, you could argue that like, well, settlers from Europe came over from Europe and they essentially took over, parts of what is now the U.S. and South America, massacred all these native peoples, and then now it is what it is now today, right? But I think it's just that, nowadays, like, it's just not something that can essentially happen here. It happens in other parts of the world. I understand that. Imperialism is still a pretty strong incentive for some countries like Russia and stuff like that. But over here, it's just not something that you can necessarily, like, do, I'm not saying that the Rajneeshis were imperialists or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, they did kind of encroach upon the privacy and the livelihoods of the Oregon, like, people that were already there, like they've had generations of they've had generational they've had a community there built from their past generations. I keep saying generations, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's just that like they've already had a foothold in that land, and I feel like there's kind of they felt threatened in a sense, because they felt like there was just kind of this new movement of people and stuff like that. But it's not really it's very different from like civil rights, from a civil rights movement, because civil rights movement is a little different, because it's involving people who were unjustly brought here, or unjustly who are unjustly treated, who are already here. You could make that kind of argument. But with the whole Rajneesh movement, like, they came to Oregon, to this like kind of pasture of land right next to this small town where they were living a pretty quiet life, and you just kind of, and I can kind of relate to that feeling, because I grew up in a small town and a small community and stuff like that. And if something like that happened, yeah, we would definitely feel like we were threatened, like what the fuck is going on, right? Why are there all these like people coming in who all identify as like a part of like a religion? Like, that's just that's a little unnerving, regardless of what type of religion it is. Like, if all these people like identified as like a certain type of religion, like, it just doesn't, it's uncomfortable. It's a little unnerving, right? Like, you feel like something bad's going to happen. There's going to be tension in the community for sure, because like you have, because they're just these outsiders that kind of, come in and stuff like that, and you feel like something bad could happen, right? And the thing is, like, I think it's hard to argue this kind of, it's really hard to, this isn't a black and white issue. I think there's just a lot of different facets to this, but I think like this type of, especially in the documentary, I think that type of movement, moving into a completely new area with a kind of a disregard to the people that were already there, is kind of, it's not good. It's going to create tension, and I think it's, there's kind of, I'm struggling to really like, because I definitely sympathize with the townspeople and stuff like that, but I also kind of, in some regards, mostly I'm more sided with like the Oregonians, but I do kind of see where the Rajneeshis are coming from too. You know, like they did make the argument like, well, you know, some civilizations are built from the ground up for the most part, you know. But I think in this sort of modern day and age, like I just don't know how well that's really going to go, especially if these people who already have very strong beliefs and already feel like they're comfortable in their position in life, you know, it's sort of difficult for them to make changes to deal with this kind of just this movement just coming out of nowhere, you know, like there's just no preparation for that kind of thing, right? And and like I'm trying to sort of see the other side of the argument, and I think like sort of the closest like analogy that I can make is like, you know, refugees or immigrants coming into another country, right? Like you could that's sort of like a thing that's like, you know, that's something that you can make a comparison to with the Rajneeshis, but the difference is that these, you know, these refugees and these immigrants, they of course they choose to leave their country, but it's for their own survivals, they're for their own safety, right? they they do have a choice, but it's really incredibly limited, you know. Like if they want to live, they got to flee the country because it's a war torn, you know, there's like a civil war or something going on, right? They have to deal with that, you know. They have to essentially ensure their family's safe, if their family's safety and their own, you know. So it's a very different kind of conditions that force these people to sort of move out from their homeland, right? The Rajneeshis is a completely different like context. These people most of them weren't like originally from India. These people they are relatively wealthy for the most part, right? You know, white Americans. There was an Australian woman, New Zealanders, some people from Europe and stuff like that. These people already have, you know, they have enough money to be able to support themselves. They just decided to completely change their lifestyle because they had the choice to. You know, they just didn't feel like the way they were working, people who were working in this very capitalistic driven society, which, you know, I can understand where they're coming from, but they still have the ability and the finances to, you know, go to a completely, you know, essentially, you know, they've already gone from their home country to India to practice the religion of Rajneesh, and then from there they moved from that point to another country, right? And you know, they already have the resources to be able to do that. You know, they have like a community and stuff like that, right? And for some people, like some people who are immigrants or refugees, they don't really have that. Of course, they could be banding together with other refugees in order to survive immigration and trying to evade war and, you know, famine and whatnot. You know, all the difficulties and all the turmoil of living in a developing country. But, you know, the big difference is like they don't have the resources that these people who claim to be Rajneeshis do, you know. So that, I think that's sort of it's very meandering, but like the point is, like, I think people who are sort of in support of that, or who are trying to defend, I don't know anyone really out there. I haven't really watched any videos where people are trying to defend that movement by any means, because I know, but it's still is a movement. At the end of the documentary, they hinted that it was still something that's been kind of continuing on till this day, you know. So there's still probably people defending, you know, the actions of the Rajneesh, and I just feel like it's just not like like the closest comparison that I can make to where like that type of action was justified is with immigration and, you know, emigration in a sense, right? But like I've hopefully I've made clear those the circumstances for people moving are completely different, case by case, you know. So I just don't think the cult really has that much to really. I feel like there are people. It's really hard to defend their actions, you know, in a sense. Like all religions, all ideas are sort of, I feel like, are mostly based on good principles and stuff like that. It's just that how they sort of construct those ideas into reality are where it should be, you know, taken most into account. Like, so I think they should be criticized for that action, and I think for the most part the documentary does a good job at detailing each point where it felt like they've sort of crossed a barrier or crossed a line, and caused other people harm and stuff like that, right? So I would definitely recommend checking that out. After finally finishing the series, I could definitely say I recommend checking that documentary series out. So that was sort of my meandering tangent of a way to say that I'm trying to get back into watching TV shows and stuff like that. I have been watching this one TV show called Rectify, which is it's a wholly drama series, and I don't usually watch those types of shows. I usually kind of stay away from that because I feel like it doesn't really engage me as much, you know. I know that Breaking Bad is kind of titled as a drama, and it is, but it does have its action set pieces. But the show Rectify, which I discovered as a recommendation on Reddit, just because I just wanted something a little different, you know, because I sort of move away from watching typical stuff. So I decided to check out this drama series, and it is kind of pure drama where it's very dialogue driven. The acting is kind of, you know, like melodramatic and whatnot, but I feel like it's still very well written for the most part. I think the characters all all the characters are very multifaceted. Even like the antagonistic characters you understand their motivations for why they do certain things and stuff like that. And so, like, you may dislike a character, but you understand why they are, you know, the way they are. They all have positive qualities to them, even the ones that are a little more like confrontational than others, you know. And I think that the series really brings up, like, again, this kind of ties back in, is kind of similar in the sense where it talks similar to like Wild Wild Country, where they talk about religion. It's very philosophical, and I kind of like I don't really like. I feel like I don't necessarily take the time to enjoy very like deeply woven dialogues, and there's several conversations in the show so far where it's been like they talk about one's belief and stuff like that. There's one character who's very like religious, and you kind of get an insight to why she believes why she believes in her religion as so much as why she does. And you see those interactions with characters, and I think it's a good show if you really just want to sort of I guess sit down and kind of soak in what the characters are kind of talking about. Sort of, it's very much like it is a character piece for the main character, for sure, because like the plot of the story, I'll just give like a brief overview for this as well. So this character named Daniel, he was in prison for raping and murdering a girl when he was 18, and he served 20 years in prison. And then after 20 years, some evidence came up showing that DNA was different from his own DNA, so that kind of released him from released him as a murderer and a rapist, right? They don't have sufficient information. They don't have sufficient evidence to prove that he really committed those crimes, because I think the semen sample was different from his own or something like that. What follows after that is him sort of adjusting. He gets released from prison, and he moves back in with his family, who he's been seeing relatively periodically in jail, from time to time, even though he was on death row, which is crazy. So it sort of follows him kind of adjusting to life outside of prison, while also sort of flashing back to his life, his inner torment while living in solitude and stuff like that. It's a very well done show. I'm currently in the second season right now, and I think it's done. There are definitely some twists and turns, I guess. It's nothing like too crazy, but by any means, it's nothing like that really shocks you. It's just very like, okay, it's very melancholy. The show's kind of melancholy too. Also like the shot composition. I'm always talking like I know cinematography and shit, but I feel like like the shot composition, the way the show is shot in general is very beautiful. They like take a lot of long takes of these, the sunsets and stuff like that. It's a very reflective piece of media. So I don't know. I was just sort of in the mood for that kind of show, I guess. Sort of moving past all the fucking anime that I've been watching prior to this series and stuff like that. It's very, you have to sort of think for yourself. Like a lot of the dialogue sort of spells out what the characters are thinking and whatnot, but how they express it, what their facial expressions show, and sort of these moments of quiet sort of gives you time to sort of ponder what the show is really trying to what point the show is really trying to make, or what the show is really trying to make the viewers think of the show. I think I feel like it's like a good show to watch for like a class or something like that. And I don't know, that's just sort of the feeling that the show gets, and it kind of it's nice, Of course, like the subject material is pretty heavy. It deals with murder, it deals with rape, it deals with these like very heavy topics and whatnot, but like it sort of it also kind of brings into question and theory about like the human condition and all that, life, death, whether someone can change as a person, how you treat someone who may not be used to living a certain way, understanding someone's beliefs and stuff like that. There's a lot of different questions that the show makes you ponder about. So I've been enjoying it so far. So that's another show that I'll do a full kind of wrap up, I guess, later on, once I do finish the show, just because I think this is a show that needs a little more time. Well, for one, I want to finish it, and I think once I give it some time, I'll do kind of like maybe do like a series review. Maybe it's another kind of maybe another review thing that I'll have on the podcast. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, those are the two kind of shows that I've been sort of watching for the last couple of weeks. I've been enjoying my time doing that, and now I should probably get back to thinking about classes, because I know I have some assignments due. Got to get those done before I start procrastinating again. That's probably a good time to stop. Anyways, it's going to do it for today. Thanks for listening. This has been Save the Semantics, signing off.